Welcome to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, Episode 3 with Danny Buck.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaksson-Hurst.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode. Thanks for joining us again. This episode I'm really excited about our guest. His name's Danny Buck. He's got 22 years experience of coaching in Premier League Academy football at the highest level. He's worked at Arsenal and Tottenham, Brentford and Barnet. Really had a fantastic career. He's worked with some of the top young players around now like Alex Iwobi, Jack Wilshere, Marcus Edwards, Josh Onomah. He's had a hand in all those guys' development, and I think it's really important actually to look at the best young players around and try and reflect on what sort of things they did when they were young and learn from that process. So he's got lots of valuable information to share if you're a young player or you're a coach about soccer player development. Before we get into that, I just want to say thanks as well for all the feedback from the first two podcasts. It's been really great. Thanks for that. And also, it's been very busy for myself. Wolverhampton Wanderers have again signed up for another year using the online homework program, the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com. So really proud of that, and it's going to be another great year. We're in talks with a few other pro clubs here in England and continental Europe as well. So it's exciting times. And also got lots of really exciting podcasts coming up with some fantastic guests. So stay tuned for that. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So, good evening, Danny Buck. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So, could you just tell us a little bit about your coaching and playing history, please?
So, there's not much to tell about my playing history. I wasn't a great player at all in any way. So, I was just playing Sunday League football and started doing a bit of work, football in the community, lots of community sessions and stuff like that. I had a bad leg break at 18, which kind of while I was at home, I spent almost the best part of 7 months in plaster. I did a lot of research. Looking at players, looking at different coaches and that. It was very early internet days there, so there was a lot of reading, hobbling down the library and stuff like that. Because as I made a decision that it's something I wanted to give a good go at once I got going again. I wrote to a lot of football clubs, got a lot of rejection letters, but lucky enough Barnet came back. Gary Castle, who works at QPR now, who was the Centre of Excellence Director at the time, got us involved in the football and community scheme. Things went quite well with that, and he got us working in the Centre of Excellence where I cut my teeth working with all various age groups with some great people. People like Paul Davis was doing the under-17s at the time. Chris Ramsey was coming in and helping us out. And it's where I met Sean O'Connor, who's the current head of recruitment for 9s to 13s at Arsenal and one of the best recruitment officers in the country who really helped us out along the way. So that's how it all started, really.
Was it? So how much coaching had you done before that, before you got that opportunity in Barnet?
I'd done about 3 years of football in the community and quite a lot, which I think is important. And even while we were at Barnet, the couple of years we spent there, anyone who worked in the Centre of Excellence had to work in the football in the community as well. So we were working with boys, girls, men, people with disabilities, different kind of handicaps, mental, physical. And I think, it certainly gave us a real basis of different skills about how we got across the message and that. So I'd spent quite a lot of time working with all sorts of different scenarios before I actually got the chance with the football with the actual Centre of Excellence. And even when that started, we still had to keep doing the football in community, as I said. So I'd probably done a good 3-4 years by the time I even got to that point.
And what was that like going into Barnet, your first academy stroke Centre of Excellence job?
It was good. We had some, Sean done a brilliant job getting the players in. Gary had a real kind of focused ethos about how we wanted to play. We had John Stewart, the manager, who was the manager at the time, who plays a particular way. And Gary wanted the boys to play for the thirds and that. And, very much trying to get the players playing in a way a lot of academies are trying to do now. And we were competing really well. I remember my first game, 20 years ago against Millwall under-11s, and we went there and we won 2-1. The boys played so well and Millwall were absolutely flabbergasted. But, players like Scott Sutter come out of that, who's now Young Boys over in Switzerland. So, a lot of the players, when Barnet's academy shut, when they got relegated, went on to get scholarships and that. Not many of them became good pros, but one, Paul Rogers, who ended up at Arsenal and ended up being a pro at Northampton and playing for Arsenal's first team and that. So, a few of the boys come through, but it was a really good learning environment without a doubt.
So then after Barnet, you moved on. What was your next academy experience after that?
Next one was Arsenal. Started with a pre-academy. So my first year there, Sean took us across. He was running the development centre, Hertfordshire Development Centre, and I coached for him there. And Roy Massey, who was the assistant academy director at the time, was great. Got us involved with all sorts of age groups, from 14s, 9s, 10s. And, I did a lot of work with the under-10s, which was Jack Wilshere's age group there, and John Joe Shelby. So I was very lucky to work with them very closely at an early age. But basically, me and Sean built up the development centre, worked with all the other development centres, got the very best under-9s we could possibly get, ready for the under-9 season, the best under-8s, sorry. And then one of the coaches left, and I got offered the under-9s post at the end of that season. So the boys that we'd been fighting to get over all the other London clubs was my first year in academy football proper.
So what was that like going into a big club like Arsenal in terms of, how did that work in practice? Did they have quite a set philosophy of how they worked, or were you free to do things you wanted to do? What was the workings of your week there?
It's nothing like the kind of bits we have nowadays with set philosophies and that. You knew the Arsenal way. Everyone saw how the first team were playing. And, the coaches there at that time were just, magnificent. Neil Banfield, Dermot Drummy, Steve Bulge, all these guys were working in the academy. What an unbelievable place to kind of work at. And basically we sat down, they told us how they wanted the players to play, and it was up to us to implement them. The only things we kind of got told were, keep ball. They wanted to see possession practices. They wanted to have practices where the players were having to receive the ball with pressure behind them. They were quite keen on those bits, but I was left to do what I was employed to do. They liked the fact that the individual kind of technical stuff that I worked, they actually liked that because it was quite a point of difference compared to the other coaches there. And I must say, we were left to get on with it. And,
So we lost you a little bit in there, but I think we got that. So in terms, you talk about the individual technical work. Just tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean about that? Obviously, I've worked with you for a long time. I've seen the quality of what you do, but just tell the people out there who don't know you as a coach, what do you mean when you talk about the individual technical work?
So Curver was always saying I was quite interested in when I started back coaching when I was 15 years old, and not being a great player, but I actually was quite good at doing it, unopposed and stuff like that, and I could replicate it quite well at no speed or anything like that, but I could actually demonstrate it okay. And that's what led me on to start looking at players like Zidane and Ronaldo and that, and just took a massive interest into those top players. All had a point of difference. They all had exceptional technical ability and how they got it. So I then spent a lot of time researching Clairefontaine and what happened there and what they were doing, and kind of it just built on from there, really, to be quite honest with you. So it just became a big interest of mine. And I kind of centred a lot of my early coaching work around that. I knew I didn't have the tactical knowledge. I knew I didn't have the years of experience. I had to have something. What kind of knowledge base could I build? And I built it on those technical bits there. And a lot of the stuff that I did, even back when I was 17, are things that are very prevalent today. And it's just sheer technical work. And I'm an absolute believer in, if you're getting the boys at 7, you've got a massive window to 12. And if you can absolutely drum in those techniques and those basics all the way through, I think you can produce world-class players, which we're starting to see now with the likes of Marcus Edwards or your Josh Onomahs coming through. They're the boys that have really been through that intense technical kind of environment or learning environment, for want of a better word, and you just have to have a look at those kind of players that are being produced.
So we'll come on to some of those players in a little bit, if you don't mind, but just what does that look like in practice then, in your sessions? How do you get that technical work out? What does that look like?
It's very mixed. So it all depends on the age group. So if you take the early age groups, so you're talking 7s and 8s for the moment, for example, it would be, so maybe your first 20 minutes would be 15 minutes of unopposed techniques. Depending on what you work on, you might work on your cuts. Cuts are absolutely vital, being able to have ankle strength, ankle flexibility, etc. A big part of what I do. You'll be working on an element of unopposed technique, at speed. Sometimes you might break it down right to the beginning, talking about the very, very minute detail of making sure feet are in the right position, arms and eyes and body and hip and knee and everything like that. And then go into an element of 1v1 or 2v1. Very important that you take that unopposed bit into a decision-making scenario. So depending on what you're working on, if you're working on defending outnumbered, you might work on 2v1s. If you're working on going over players or counter-attacking, then you might work on 1v1s, depending. But always have at least a little bit before you then go into your main element of your session of a bit of opposed work. And even if it's defending, there's things you can do with a ball that replicate defending movements that get them having more and more touches of the ball and getting them into the right position. So unopposed and then opposed, and then just then replicating that throughout the rest of the practice. I'm just using 1v1 as an example there, but you've got passing, taking on the back foot. If you're working on reverse passes or longer passes, whatever it is, it's have that unopposed start of it to get that fundamental of the technique correct first before you then go into the opposed situation.
What would you say about some people who say that you're imposing a technique on a player, that you're forcing them to do it a certain way and not giving them freedom? Obviously, there's a lot. This is quite a controversial subject at the moment, especially on social media, with some specialists. I'm just going to put that in little quote marks, talking about imposing techniques on players.
I think when you say specialist, one of the things that worries me about the online stuff is as I was touching on my coaching history. I did 4 years before I even really got a sniff of a proper academy, and there's a lot of people that probably haven't done 4 years at the moment that are making very, very strong opinions based on very little experience. And I think it depends what you're working on. So the players should always be allowed, if they've got a skill, and I'll use a skill for an example, if they're really proficient at doing it a certain way, you should let them do it that way. So when we do unopposed techniques like the Ricardo 6 move, which obviously well, which is come from Ricardo Moniers that we worked at Tottenham with, I will show them the basis of the moves, and then it's up to them to freestyle and make those moves how best they see do them. Now, for something like where you do like the V movement, almost a Puskas, we actually work that to increase ankle flexibility. So I want them to use the insides of their feet to increase their ankle flexibility. You're only working that to do that. If you want to go and you can work it with an outside or whatever, you go and find your own way. And I think that's the important bit. Really, all you're trying to get them doing is to the point of becoming dynamic, becoming, both-sided, becoming, having that mindset of being able to do something different to the other players, and then they find their way with it. Josh Bowie, who's a player we had at Brentford who's just moved to Man United, was a great example of that. We would show him, we would talk to him, we would refine his favourite way of doing it, and then he would go and practice it. So I think the only people that are imposing moves on them are the people that haven't got the in-depth knowledge. And I think that's one of the dangers of technical practices, trying to teach a technique that you're not 100% au fait with. You're almost guessing. Like someone will see Ronaldinho and then go, you've got to teach it like Ronaldinho. That's not the way. You watch Ronaldinho, you watch Zidane, you watch Ronaldo, you watch Rooney, you watch, Hazard, and have a look and see what the common traits are. And I think that's where the misconceptions or the mistakes are being made, to be quite honest.
I think there's a bit of an information gap in England around skills coaching, around ball mastery and 1v1. I don't know what your thoughts are. Obviously, we were lucky to work in a club at that time under someone like Ricardo, who's very knowledgeable, and other people. Do you think there's an issue? Do you think there's an information gap? Do you think there's not enough quality information for coaches coming from the FA in this area?
It's a massive knowledge gap. I still can't believe that I almost go in and people see me as kind of someone who knows about a specialist subject when I've been doing it for the last 22 years. It's like, how can this still be deemed as a specialist subject? It's crazy. I think the difficulty is, it's like a lot of things, it's difficult. It's not easy. You have to spend a lot of time looking, watching, trying stuff, error stuff. I think a lot of coaches are scared of demos at times, to be quite honest with you, player. So I had to go and practice for hours over the park to get it to the point where I was comfortable enough to demo. And I think anything that takes a lot of time, or anything that could spark a bit of debate, or anything that, you have to really work on, I think people are a little bit worried about. Because as a coach, I remember being a young coach, I wanted everything to look perfect. I wanted everything to be great. I didn't want to be in a situation where I could potentially fail, But I had to put myself in that situation to get to where I've got to now. So, I think coaches have got to be a little bit braver. It's difficult to coach. It's hard to coach. And you have to know what exactly your subject is. If you don't, then you can't teach it. That's what I think's hard, and that's what I think people are missing out on at the moment, to be quite honest.
But I suppose at the same time, you got to you can almost empathise with some coaches if you've got these specialists telling them that this isn't the way to go. You should just be letting them play a game. So because of the mixed messages coming, for a young aspiring coach, it's like who do you listen to? Because people talk about evidence. So what evidence have we got that this way works? That this is a productive way of developing players?
Have a look midweek. Look at Marcus Edwards. I would say don't look any further than that. Have a look at the players Clairefontaine back in the day produced. Thierry Henry became the player he is because he went through Clairefontaine. Clairefontaine did hours of unopposed work, and you would do a trick and you had to replicate that same trick. It weren't up to Henry. He had to do that same trick over and over again until he was proficient at it before he could then move on. Cristiano Ronaldo, Sporting Lisbon were unbelievable at that. I never forget when we had a player come over from Sporting Lisbon when I was at Arsenal the first time, and he would literally put down a 25, 30 minutes. And you'd ask him what you're doing. He'd practice single scissor, double scissor. That would always be practicing.
So just say that again, Danny. So you could break up a bit. He'd put down a cone and then he'd put down a cone and he would just take it on for half hour, just doing single scissor, double scissor. And we used to say to Alex, why are you doing that? And he says, that's what kind of things we work in Lisbon. They want us to be absolutely perfect at our techniques. So, when you look at someone like Sporting Lisbon that have produced a Ronaldo or a Quaresma, look at that skill. You look at the players Clairefontaine produced. Look at the skill level. They're a much higher skill level than the players that have been produced just playing football matches. And I think there's a misconception that in South America they just play futsal and that's it. If you actually spend time with River Plate and countries like that, clubs like that, they actually do a lot of unopposed technique as well as a lot of futsal, a lot of game-based related. And I think what they've got is a good mix. And I think that's maybe something we've struggled with in England. You sometimes get the people that just do loads of unopposed stuff, which is wrong. And you get the people that just play loads of games, which is wrong. It's all about a balance. And it's all about the right balance at the right ages, at the right time, depending on what you're working on. And that's where I think probably we're going a bit of a miss at the moment. So I think that's right. I think there was too much, unopposed passing drills, which are low tempo, a bit static, and I think that is an issue. But I mean, like I say, I think there's got to be a balance. I'm all in favour of more opposed stuff, but I believe as well, like you, that to get that elite level technique, that real top level technique, you need to spend time on the ball, and an unopposed environment as well to really develop that. Thinking about your, sorry, go on.
No, go on, Crow.
So talking about some of those players you worked at Arsenal with that young age group. Talk about some of these players that have gone on to have success that have come out of this sort of system.
So I think Alex is a really good example. Alex Iwobi, Alex and Chuba are two great examples actually. That age group was
Chuba Akpom and Alex Iwobi.
Yeah,
Alex Iwobi,
that age group. Out of the 14 players that signed at under 9, 10 are professional football players, which is incredible. Really, you've obviously got them two at the higher echelon, and then you've got players like Julian Banton that's at Sheffield United. You've got Frankie Kent who's playing for Colchester United, and I could keep going on. There's loads of them, and I think you look at someone like Alex, who wasn't a standout performer at under 9. He was a good football player without a shadow of doubt. But if you had to put your hat on someone, you would put your hat on Chuba. And Chuba's done great, don't get me wrong. But Alex, what he had was an inbuilt desire. His uncle, as everyone knows, was JJ Okocha, so he loved doing skills and that. And whatever you showed Alex, he would go away and practice, and he loved practicing it. And I think that's one of the things you miss if you don't teach those technical based type things at an early age. The kids will go and practice it again and again and again and again and again. And it's something they'll come back and say, look what I've done now, Danny. And Alex was very much like that. If you're looking for someone who's passed the grit test over 9 years in an academy football, Alex Iwobi is definitely the player that shines out. And I think you look at them two now, Alex is slightly ahead of Chuba at the moment, which is fine, but both of them are technically very, very good players. And I think, they're technically good players because Arsenal continue to educate them well, and they had a very, very good basis from 7, 8 and 9. And I honestly believe that's really set them on the right path. But something like that age group on Saturdays before games, this was back when academies only used to train twice a week and then play. So I piloted a year. I actually did it free. I told Arsenal I didn't want any money. I just wanted to see what they would be like if I could get them to a better level if they were training 3 times a week. And we used to train for 2 hours on a Saturday. And all they used to do was unopposed techniques. For those 2 hours, they just used to work on different variations of finishing, different variations of passing, etc., etc. And the quality those boys showed at under 9 that I haven't seen replicated.
Wow. So then time comes to move across to make your next move. Where to another part of London? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I spent 5.5 years at Arsenal, then made the tough call to go to Tottenham. Chris Ramsey had just moved back from America. John McDermott had taken over recently at Tottenham's academy. And Chris was a very important early mentor to me. When I was at Barnet, he really helped us out, really talked through his philosophy. It linked well with me, and we really got on quite well. Things at Arsenal were good. I really enjoyed it, but I thought, a different challenge would be a good one to take. So I jumped over. And then, spent the next 5 years working at Tottenham. It was difficult. Tottenham was certainly not the academy it is today when we joined. It was very difficult. We had a very hard first year, big transitional year where a lot of players were released and a lot of players came in. But very interesting. John had a clear philosophy how he wanted the boys to play. Chris, is a great coach. He wants the players to be able to have lots of variations, different techniques, very clever coaches in the world without a doubt, and certainly the best I've ever worked with, and had a big influence on what I do now. And I think that Spurs really just helped refine the kind of things that I believed in football. And we were able to really go at it and really kind of push it hard and really make those boys as technically good as we could, because we didn't have the best players when we first went in there. We had to work really, really hard. And then over time, as recruitment got better, we got more and more top people. I knew someone that was playing at his club, and he comes through the door and it's like, we haven't got a player like this. So, interesting move without a doubt, but, certainly one that was good at the time.
Can you tell us a little bit about the philosophy there then, particularly? You talked about, it struck a chord with you. What was it? What was the workings there?
I think it was, we had to roll our socks up and really work with the players. At Arsenal, the players were so good, particularly at an early age, that, you could be poor as a coach and you could still win every weekend. And some of my failings as a coach when I was at Arsenal wouldn't have got shown up until I went to Spurs, where some of my failings were showing. You might get frustrated a little bit too easy. You might not be looking at certain pictures that you should have been looking at. You question whether at times you were working as hard as you should have been working because your players were so good. Where going back to Spurs, you had to work with them and get going. So I think it was a good reset for me, and kind of ironed out a few of the things that I weren't quite as good at, to be quite honest with you. But I think, John and Chris firmly believe in this is how we want people to play. This is how we want them to go, with Ricardo there as well. And it just meant as a coach like me, you could just coach and just do what you believed in, which I think is important at any football club you're at.
So what was that philosophy? What did that look like then? What was the key fundamentals in the foundation phase, for instance, as a under-9s coach? What were the key fundamentals of that philosophy? So
they went complete extreme. So keepers weren't kicking the ball, which I don't agree with, but I don't agree with now anyway. But basically, play at the back, learn to play at the back, play through the thirds, have a skill, have a trick. Can you dominate 1v1? They were the key things that John wanted. He wanted exciting players that could look after a football. He wanted technical players, not players that just got through on pace and power. He always used, being quick and thick. Those days are gone. You had to have intelligence. You had to have technique, and that was very much a philosophy that ran through the club.
And that's not a very typical English way of doing things, right? Am I right in saying that? When you first went there, was that a bit of a
it was very different, Yeah, it definitely was, and you got to give John and Chris and a lot of credit for kind of doing that. I think they knew they had to do something different, and I think they couldn't have gone in there and just tried to replicate what others do, because it wouldn't have worked. And they had a strong belief, as I was saying, in technical players. It was hard because we didn't have the best players, but certainly some of those players that might not have stuck out, people like Tom Carroll have gone on to have a good career at the moment, doing well at Tottenham. Players like him wouldn't have stood out. And probably the most famous one's Harry Kane, who was released at Arsenal. When you look back at that and you think that was a mistake, because he was technically good, had a good brain. He just wasn't the athlete that people wanted. He came into Spurs at under 12, was certainly not pulling up any trees or anything like that, but technically worked hard, a bit like Alex would work. Environments produced for him. Andros Townsend, another player that was overlooked by Arsenal. Ends up in Tottenham, right environment, right time, ends up carving out a good career for himself. You know, Ryan Fredericks is exactly the same, the lad at Fulham, released by Arsenal, goes into Tottenham, right environment, technically develops, now a good professional at a championship club. So, you know, it was an interesting project without a doubt.
What did the ball mastery in the 1v1 look like then, in terms of in practice and working with Ricardo? What influence did he have in the academy?
So Ricardo, he was working with the first team and he still came in and worked with the 8s or the 7s. It was unbelievable. He'd just run off one pitch and go on another. But it was just lots of turns, tricks, lots of 1v1, lots of 2v2. He'd put a 3v3 pit, like he'd play a 3v3 on a 9v9 pitch. And he talked about developing the power even in the youngsters and the bravery and not being scared. And, you know, it was just basically a lot of unopposed, a lot of semi-pressure and a lot of pressure, but on very, very big pitches. Variations of finishing, you know, just everything was technical. If you struggled technically, you would fail until the point of you learned the technique.
Okay, now thinking about some of those players coming out, now some of the boys you mentioned Marcus, and let's talk about maybe Josh Onomah. Excuse me. Think about those players. Looking back, reflecting, what sort of environment did they come from? What were they doing at the younger age groups? We track back, looking at their success they're having now or on the brink of it. What were they doing in the foundation phase when they were 8s, 9s, 10s?
So Josh came in. We didn't have the best under 9s group at that time, and he came in and straight away stuck out. We literally tried. I wanted to sign him after the first session. You could see he was the type of footballer that certainly we had at Arsenal beforehand. And what was good, he had good balance. He was pretty quick. He wasn't a bad finisher. He just looked like a good footballer, pretty intelligent, and really stuck out a mile. And by the end of the season, I remember we ended up having a bit of a fight with Chelsea. He scored 6 against Chelsea on the last game of the season, and we still hadn't secured him. We were all a little bit nervous, but we managed to get him over the line in the end, and he's obviously progressed well. I had him then again at under 12s. So that group I had at under 9s, I then replicated and had them at under 12s. People like Chris McGoma and who's in the under 21s now. There's a lot of the 21s now at Spurs that were those 9s that we signed throughout that season, if that made sense. So Josh just was a good football player, good work ethic, practiced hard, but just, someone I would say you come in and he sticks out as a football player. So
they would have done a lot of the unopposed stuff and the 1v1, that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely flooded between 9 and 12. That first 20 minutes was the 20 minutes I related to earlier. There would be unopposed technique again and again and again, bit of 1v1, and then in the sessions there'll be unopposed passing, all related to the game, all explain to them why this is prevalent, why you're doing this, and a lot of decision making unopposed as well. It's one of the things I think people miss with unopposed. There's a kind of a passing rotation thing that we do where your movement and the pass you make is dependent on what movements others do and where the space is, but it's still unopposed. It's still doing your basics. It's just got a lot of decision making in it. It hasn't got pressure here, there and everywhere. They've just got a few things they've got to focus on. And he had that. And by under 12s, I remember a game we played in Arusa in Spain and in Villa Garcia. And we beat Real Madrid 2-0, played them off the park, technically better than every single one of the Real Madrid players. There's not many times you'll say that.
Wow. And so now thinking about Marcus Edwards, that Tim Sherwood, you called him, the best academy player he's ever seen. Tell us a little bit about his background.
So Marcus came in at under 8. As you can imagine, small. He had the hair already then sticking out. Left footer, didn't touch the ball with his right foot, but lots of tricks, little bag of tricks he was, but really struggled to impact on the games. But even the 3v3s we were doing, he really struggled, got pushed over easy. His desire at times wasn't great, but there was something definitely in there. The issue we had was a few of the full-timers at Tottenham didn't like him, didn't fancy him. So myself, and you'll remember well, we had to almost hide him in the sessions. And when people used to come up, because we was training in the dome, people didn't notice. So we kept going with him. We thought he had something. We kept him going. We kept playing him in the development games. And I remember he played a game against Watford and did really, really well. And eventually we got him over the line and got him signed. But, that was only after a time of really keeping him back and working really, really hard with him to try and get out what we thought he had in him. And then we just instantly worked him in every single aspect of his game to keep developing him. Technique, really kind of flourish the natural ability he's got. And touching on your point earlier where, you know, some people would say doing unopposed techniques stifle players, have a look at him, ask Marcus, because I was speaking to him only a couple of weeks ago, ask him if doing lots of unopposed techniques stifled him. He'll tell you that it made him the player he is today, because he was able to go and work on them and develop his game even further. And he's now got a good right foot, you know, he's proficient on it, you know, his left foot's fantastic, but he's so dynamic, so quick. And for me, his technical excellence is just a kind of a byproduct of all those bits that have been done over the, you know, years and years. And I think Tottenham have done a brilliant job with him, to be honest with you. You know, people like Justin Cochran and that have really kept working with him and made sure he's developed all the way through. And I think, you know, that just shows that intense technical kind of environment that's created at Tottenham has really helped someone like Marcus get to where he is.
So it's interesting looking at players like that, those creative players coming from a structured environment, whether it's Iwobi or, you know, Marcus Edwards, and, you know, a lot of people who are quick to criticise the academy system and say, you know, we can't produce creative players in there because, you know, it's too structured, there's too many coaches there, it's too, you know, coach led. But, you know, obviously there's a lot of examples of good players coming out of these sorts of systems.
It is 100%. I think the issue is, as I say, too many inexperienced people in positions of power. And I think the issue, when I was learning, I didn't have Twitter and I didn't have Facebook. You know, I just about had dial-up if you were lucky to get anything. So I had to speak to people. I used to work 7 days a week at Arsenal when I first went there, and I used to get paid for 2 days a week. You know, because I'd sit there and I would watch Steve Bolden and ask him questions. I'd watch Neil Banfield. I was lucky enough to go and watch Don Howe and ask him questions. I was lucky enough to go and watch Arsene Wenger work and watch the Arsenal first team. But if I wanted, you know, I think the difference is now, you know, if I wanted a third man running practice, I watched Freddie Ljungberg and watch what he did in the game. I watch what he did in training, and I'd go away and build a session around that. I think now you look on the net, you find a third man running drill and you do it. And I think that's the fundamental difference from how I was educated as a coach to how you would now be educated as a coach, if that makes sense. You know, all the stuff I do is based around what I see on the pitch. You know, I'll take bits and bobs. There's some good bits on the net. It's something like, you know, what the coaching family do and everything like that on Twitter is great. You know, I think they share the right things, but you've got to watch the game, design your practices around the game, design your practices around what you see and not kind of what you hear, if that makes sense. The detail's really what we should be coaching, not where the cones go.
And so after Spurs then, you make another move?
Make a random move to Brentford, which was interesting. Ozzy Abanji, who I worked with closely at Arsenal and at Tottenham, moved there to take over as an academy director. Sean O'Connor, who I'd worked with obviously for years, went there as the head of recruitment. And they asked us to come in and run the 14s to 16s, which was a kind of the only age group that I had missing off my portfolio. I'd worked with 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s. You know, I had that all in my locker, and I thought, yeah, it might be a good chance to preparing players for their scholarships. So I took the punt. It was tough. The players were at an extremely low level when we went there. So a bit like Tottenham, but worse, where we had to get rid of a lot of players, real big recruitment drive, but it's so hard when you're Brentford. It was hard when you were Tottenham. You can imagine me in Brentford being probably the smallest club, you know, in London pretty much at that time, with very little history of producing lots of football players. We had to work very, very hard, and the first 18 months was extremely difficult. But we created an environment. We had a really clear philosophy. Ozzy detailed down how we wanted the players to play, and it was very much, again, around the technical base, but with a bit more game intelligence. We allowed the keepers to kick it. If there was a 2v1 high up the pitch, then we would encourage a longer pass or a goalkeeper to kick it. We played 4-diamond-2, which, you know, was a complete anathema to everyone. It's got to be 4-3-3, but we're a big believer of... Give an example. We played 2 in the middle because when we used to play 3 in the middle at Tottenham, if you ever used to change your shape, the 2, if you went from a 3 to a 2, the 2 really struggled because they always thought someone was covering them. So and players were coming in going, oh, I'm a number 10 or I'm a 4. We didn't like that. So we said, listen, you're a midfield player and we're fine. You're at a lot older age. So we played with 2 8s. We played with a diamond, and it depended how wide we played that diamond, depending if we had a tricky winger or not. But it meant we could play some under-maturated players in the middle, and just bomb our fullbacks on and play with 2 centre forwards, something that people don't do. And sometimes we might play them a little bit deeper as a 10 at times, but very much it was a 4 diamond 2, and people were calling us dinosaurs or whatever. And now you see loads of people doing it because it really does create a kind of pressure cooker of development. And we went down to the very small detail of telling the players what we expected from them all in those kind of positions. And we lost games because we played 4 diamond 2 without a shadow of a doubt. But we think, some of the players that are coming through, and certainly the players, people like Jan Carlo that's gone to Man City, and as I said, Josh Bowie that's gone to Man United, and the players that are playing in Tom Field, who's played in the first team now at Brentford, Bradley Clayton, James Very, Reece Cole, all those players have come through that system. So it was interesting, it was hard, but within 3.5 years of us being there, we went and won the Milk Cup with our 97 age group. The tournament, beat Everton in the final, which is a huge credit to the boys. Beat CSK in Moscow, beat Liverpool in the semi-finals. It just shows you what hard work and working with the players can do. And to those as well who don't like unopposed techniques, they were 14s, 15s, 16s. They came in, they worked on unopposed techniques with a mixture of the tactical stuff as well. But they were very much doing Ricardo 6s, Bucky 7s, cuts, every single session, every single week, every month. And we turned players that were turned away from other clubs, or players that had literally come straight off the park. Reece Cole hadn't even played in a professional club. He's now played for the first team at Brentford, literally off the park. And we managed to basically, in 4 years, get them into the first team, which is incredible, really, in this country. But that was because we had an environment that we could make those kind of things happen, and we worked. But the work that went into those players, from sports science, physios to the technical staff, was immense. It was an exhausted 6 years at Brentford, because you really did have to earn your little money that you do in football.
What was it like practically, though, from going from Tottenham, Arsenal previously, some two of the biggest clubs in the world, into Brentford, with no disrespect to like a smaller club? What was it like in terms of, the basic things like your facilities and your equipment and that, was it a real big culture shock for you? Or was it a really big change?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was at Barnet, and I remember on Wednesday nights we all had to, with the last half hour, we all had to train on the same 7-a-side pitch, and that was 5 age groups. So I knew what it was like back then. With I had to design sessions with 1 cone and 1 ball or something like that. So it was reaffirming the brain a little bit. The planes landing in Heathrow were the biggest problem, because you had to time when you did your interventions. Otherwise, jumbo jet was flying over and you couldn't talk to the players. But no, listen, at the end of the day, they're material things that, how much difference does that make to producing a player? Question mark. As long as you've got balls, as long as you've got grass, as long as you've got cones and the right people, that's what we very much sold that academy on. And listen, the owner at the time, who was, obviously he's changed his mind now, he shut the academy, but, 2.5 million out of his own pocket for the fabulous dome they had at Uxbridge. He definitely did invest to try and get us to, the point of, having some good facilities. But, Jersey Road was Jersey Road. The pitches weren't great, but our players had to get on with it. And if we'd have used that as an excuse, then we wouldn't have been doing our job. You just got to get on with it, roll your socks up. What kit we did have, you get on with it. People had this perception that we had a massive budget at Brentford. We definitely didn't have a massive budget at Brentford. The owner building the dome was a nice to have, without a doubt, and we were lucky to have that. But it was, it was hard, and you just got on with it. But I enjoyed it. It was, it's definitely one of the highlights of my coaching career. I'm not a massive one with winning and that, but that day when we won that Milk Cup, beating Liverpool the day before fairly, outplaying Everton, playing them off the park on the day after, and those boys kind of lifting that trophy in front of the owner, who flew over there in his private jet because he's never seen Brentford really winning anything. I think you look at what Oz, Sean, me and the other staff all did in those kind of, that was one of the highlights definitely of the last 22 years, without doubt.
Okay, excellent. So you talked about, obviously, Chris Ramsey being a big mentor in your career. What other coaches would you say have had a big influence on the way you do things, or who have you seen that have really, affected the way you as a coach?
I think watching Don Howe and Neil Banfield in my first year at Arsenal, definitely big influences. Just the way they got things across to players. You speak to anyone. I met Don maybe 5-6 times. Every single time I met him, the learning was ridiculous. I'd go home and spend about an hour writing notes. It was just mad. So they had a big influence, how they delivered things, how they got things across to players, how they set things up. Their practice design, before practice design was even something that people were saying was kind of above anything I'd ever seen. So they were big influences. Chris, as I've touched on, Ricardo. I think I've never seen anyone in England have the approach that Ricardo had towards skills coaching. And I think, he just showed what could be done. And I think, he just kind of took the kind of ethos I had for skills coaching onto another level, mainly around the 1v1, going around players or going over players. He didn't do much on the passing side and stuff like that, but I think he had a big influence there. And randomly, someone who's not a coach, Sean O'Connor, recruitment. Okay. I keep hearing terms that, this club's a coaching club and everything like that. No club's a club without players. Recruitment's the most important thing. And what I've learned off him about what players have got and what to look for and how he approaches it, and that makes a big difference to me as a coach, because, we need to see those things as well as just coaching the players, because we need to see things that are right and wrong. And it's amazing what you can learn off recruitment staff as well.
So you just broke up at the end there, but I think we got that about Sean O'Connor. Thanks for that. Just quickly, Dan, you talked about going round your 1v1. Do you want to elaborate on that? Because obviously not a lot of people will understand that, especially not in England, because obviously it's not a great, it's not a very coach subject.
So going over players is basically taking a player on face to face, and going around is with your back to play and stuff like that. So it's a term that Ricardo used a lot, and it's a term we've used kind of since going forward, really. So
would you then, in theory, if you're looking at the way you approach 1v1, would you then split that up? Would it be how long would you spend on each of that? How would you approach those two different areas of 1v1?
It depends. Monthly topic. You can't just work on it randomly. You can't just go, right, today's 20 minutes, I'm going to do this. So, something like a defensive month, it needs a variation. If you're doing counter-attacking month and you're working on going over players, perfect for counter-attacking month. If you're doing playing through the thirds, very good month for going around players. So, it's all applicable to what you're working on. And if you're not going into that level of practice design, then you're kind of killing the players, to be quite honest with you. And again, I think it goes back to the point where I think this is the misconception of technical work. I think people do it for doing its sake, not doing it for a specific reason. And I think it's all dependent on what your monthly topic is, your weekly topic is, your daily topic is, and then kind of just build your kind of whether you're going to go around, go over. But I must say, one of the most undercoached things, I think, is the going around players who've got that ability to twist and turn and receive it with a player behind them. I think a lot of players struggle with players behind them, and I think it's something that's undercoached, to be honest with you. And I think I certainly undercoached it in my early years without a shadow of a doubt. I look back on that and think I definitely didn't do enough of that. And there was something towards the end of Tottenham and certainly at Brentford I did a lot of, and I think it made a big difference. I think you're right. I think if you look at classic 1v1 practices, it's a lot of 9 out of 10 or even more is going to be people constructing a practice where someone's dribbling at a player. Whereas, I think in that one, how many times do we work with players with someone right up behind them? And obviously, man, that really been, probably a more difficult technique to deal with, in that situation. It also makes a move. A lot of my 1v1 or 2v1 or 3v2 practices are now sparked on movement and you receiving the ball, you're back to goal, or your movement's got to be good enough so you can front the player up. But it's all, and I think that's where you kind of get the multiple outcomes in the pressure cooker of, is your movement good enough to get you in a position to do X or Y? And then the defender's got to react to that. If the defender drops off, does he still take it on his front foot? Or if the defender drops off, does he then check his shoulder, turn out, etc.? It's just a more realistic way of starting your practices, in my opinion. So, speaking about different clubs now, have you been anywhere else? Have you been abroad to look at clubs? Have you been anywhere else and seen
other like best practice that you could talk about?
Well, I'm lucky enough that I've done over 100 tours now in my old career. So I've seen a lot of different clubs. I've seen a lot of, I've been to, pretty much every continent apart from Africa in a footballing sense, and seen just a complete variety of how people do stuff, different clubs doing things. When we were at Sporting Lisbon, I was touching on, you just see an absolute extreme of taking players on and technical work. When I was lucky enough to be in Spain watching Real Madrid, I watched the first team, and Zidane would come out and work 20 minutes with a ball on his own, doing twists and turns and his cuts, and then the rest of the players would come out and then work 20 minutes with a ball, just working up and across a pitch. You go to South America, as I was touching on earlier, and you see, the real in-depth technical work they do, and a lot of unopposed pattern work, actually, which is, would probably surprise quite a few coaches in this country. They do a lot of unopposed pattern work. And one of the best ones we did recently was at Spurs, we went to Spain, went to Villa Garcia every year, which was fantastic, playing against Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Valencia every year. And that was a real education, speaking to their coaches. But I took a Brentford under 16s team to Barcelona 18 months ago, and we had a real good chat with the coaches while I was out there about what they did with the younger age groups and that was a real good education, a real good eye-opener. I remember asking them, we were talking to them about sports science, and they went, "Do you mean the physios?" "No, sports science. Have you got a gym?" And they took us to this room, which was literally 6x6 with one mat in it, and that was their sports science room for their under 16s. So, it's you just seen so much in so many different countries, and I think you hear a lot of things that in this country they do this, in this country they do that, and I think you might go and do one trip and then think that's what they do, and it's not like that. You need to spend time, you need to speak to coaches, you need to play against these teams over a prolonged period of time to see what they do and why they do it. And I've been lucky because I've been at top clubs that have allowed me to go and see those kind of things. Even at Brentford, we were lucky that we actually went on quite a few trips. Yeah, a lot of countries, a lot of experience, and I've seen a lot of very different things.
Okay, just a couple more things. I know you got many things to do, so I don't keep you too long, mate. We'll just say some people have said the 10,000 hour rule is a myth. So it's a big thing bumping around social media. What's your thoughts on that?
Ask Harry Kane if he thinks it's a myth. He's definitely done his 10,000 hours and he's worked harder. Ask Alex Iwobi if he thinks practicing hard made a difference. I think, anyone who thinks you're born and you're a golfer or you're born and you're a footballer is crazy. I think, Matthew Side obviously has covered it very well in his books he's done. And I think, environment's a massive thing. He talks about, the fact that his older brother had a ping pong table and that meant he played ping pong. You've got to have the right environment and then be in the right places at the right time. And then it's down to the person to have that inbuilt desire to want to actually do it. It doesn't matter, your dad could have a football pitch in the back garden and you could play football every day. But if you haven't really got the desire to go and practice and be a footballer or have access to the top coaches that can help you become a football player, then you're not going to become a football player. So, it's, everyone has their own kind of path. The boys from South America that might have grown up in the favelas or something like that, they did their 10,000 hours playing on the streets. I've probably done my 10,000 hours of coaching through the years that I've done it. I've done okay with my coaching, but if you put me in a session when I was 13, no one would have said I was going to be a coach. That happened when I went and worked at it. So I'm a big believer in practice. I'm a big believer in the right practice. Not doing, random practice is important. Proper practice is important. Practicing the right thing is what I touched on earlier. I think, if you've got people teaching technical stuff that don't understand the technique themselves, that's a real what's gone wrong when people have teach stuff out of players and stuff like that in the past. But for me, 10,000 hour rule is listen, it might not be 10,000 hours, people get hung up a little bit on it, but a lot of practice is vital. Beckham's a great example of that, isn't he? Hitting his free kicks against a tree. Would he be as good as he is if he didn't do that?
Well, that's why I think. That's the thing for me is that it might not be a rule, but it's definitely a guideline. That's the thing, isn't it? You don't get anywhere without putting the hours in, and I think it's like it's irresponsible for some people, some parent specialists to say it's not. it's not a rule, and that you can somehow just think, all right, I'm going to just go down to the local soccer school once a week and then I'm going to be a professional footballer. But, you know.
No chance. And I think the problem is with that going around Twitter as much as it is now from, senior people, coaches are going to start believing it. And, I think if coaches are starting to stop coaching, and it worries me because I think people are starting to believe kind of, they let the games be the teacher stuff and, the kind of natural talent bits. It worries me a bit because then you could be a tree stump instead of a coach. I haven't, for the last 20 odd years I've been doing it, I can't see how that would ever work.
What's just finally, last couple of things. What advice would you have for a young footballer, a young aspiring footballer?
Just, you've got to be in the right environment. Don't be somewhere just because the badge is pretty or you support them or whatever. You've got to be in the right environment. It's going to make you develop. I think you've got to be around the right people that you trust to help you develop. And I think you've got to do a lot of the work yourself. The old excuse board. Don't look at excuses. Find a way of being able to practice as much as you can. Do the right practice. Watch football. Young players don't watch football much anymore for some crazy reason. And I think, spend the time that you need to become the very best. And to do that, you've got to live and breathe it. You've got to, if you really want to be a football player, then you've got to do it and become a football player. When you're 8 and 9 and 10, you're doing it, you enjoy it, play cricket, play some other sports and everything like that. But if you're talented, make sure that isn't to the detriment of what you're showing some talent at and showing some good ability at. But once you start getting to the 15, 16, it's a job you're going for there. You've really got to focus. You've really got to apply yourselves. And what I saw at Brentford was the players that applied themselves became players. The players that didn't, that maybe were showing better signs at 14, didn't become players. Simple as that.
And what advice would you have for a young aspiring coach who'd like to work in academy football?
Put the hours in. Very similar to what I've just said about a player. As I said to you, I used to do 7 days a week at Arsenal and get paid for 2. One of the issues we had at Brentford, if you weren't paying them, they weren't coming in. And I just can't get my head around things like that. If I'd have insisted on being paid, I wouldn't have been able to watch Donnell. I wouldn't have been able to watch Neil Banfield. I remember I used to go and watch on Thursday nights Neil and Steve and Dermot work with their under 14s, 15s, 16s. And, after a long time of watching, they started getting me involved. And then when they saw kind of the individual technique bits, they actually gave me the first half hour to go and work with the players. And that meant I had access to go and work with, Kieran Gibbs, Henry Lansbury, Jack Wilshere, Sanchez Watts, some of the top players in the country at that time. I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't have put myself out and put myself in that position to go and learn and work. And that's the big thing. I think the difference between, the coaches, the younger coaches that I've seen now, as a young coach at Fulham now, Joe Maloney, who was a player with us at Brentford, and he's definitely followed that philosophy. He's stopped playing. He spent loads of time coming in, watching, asking questions, and I think he's got a good future ahead of him because he's got that mindset. But that seems a rarity now. People want to get their money, and I think they see something on Twitter and they think, that's it, I don't need to go and watch someone work, where the little details, watching Steve Bold do a defensive session, you get miles more out of that than anything you'll ever see on Twitter, with all due respect to the things that get put on Twitter and stuff like that. I was able to have exposure to that. And I think you've got to find an environment where you can get that kind of exposure and get that kind of learning and, just spend as much time as you possibly can learning different things and keep an open mind. I think towards the end at Arsenal, I probably my mind was closing a little bit. And as I touched on before, I think that was one of the bonuses of the Tottenham move. Kind of reset, started opening my mind up a little bit more. And I think that made a big difference to me then going forward, because, having a closed mindset is just a disaster.
Danny, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, Saul.
Amazing insight. And thanks very much. Good luck. And I'll speak to you soon. No problem. Thanks, Saul.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.